SpaceX deserves considerable credit for reinvigorating interest and investment in the private space industry. Its rockets have succeeded in delivering satellites into orbit and cargo payloads to the International Space Station. And through SpaceX's subsidiary Starlink, CEO Elon Musk penned a deal that is giving Kremlin sleepless nights. And we are here to tell you why. Well, according to Russian officials and army generals, Starlink satellites can be used to change the flight path of missiles, meaning in times of war, the NATO member states will always be 10 steps ahead. According to the Kremlin, Starlink can also be used to deliver purely political and most likely anti-Russian content directly to mobile phones. Roscosmos Director General Dmitry Rogozin believes that Starlink satellites launched by Elon Musk's company SpaceX can be used for future military purposes, including changing the flight path of cruise missiles and managing the flight path of spy networks. Roscosmos is the state space corporation of Russia. This year, referring to 2021, SpaceX received about $900 million in state subsidies. The entire subsidy for the forthcoming period is $20 billion. So, a question arises, why would the government do that? And the answer is, those spacecraft provide internet connection. They can become a platform for steering cruise missiles, for changing their flight path when they're already in flight. They could also be used for sending orders to special forces, to networks of agents, he said. Rogozin went on to say that by now, about 1,800 Starlink satellites were delivered to orbit. The next stage of the project envisages the launch of 17,000 spacecraft. Eventually, Starlink's orbital constellation will comprise about 42,000 satellites. We won't just sit and wait, of course. We have our own project, Sfera. It was presented to the president earlier this year, and we plan to orbit hundreds of our own satellites to protect our sovereignty, Rogozin said. Russia and Musk have had a rocky relationship in the past few years. Back in 2020, the Russian Academy of Sciences planned to file a complaint with the United Nations for Elon Musk's high-speed internet satellites, which it said would interfere with astronomers' work. SpaceX's Starlink constellation is a planned network of up to 30,000 satellites in low Earth orbit, intended to beam broadband internet globally. Russian scientists argue that sunlight reflections from Starlink satellites will ruin between 30% and 40% of space images. That aside, his last collaboration with Nato is clearly sending chills down the spines of the Russians. In late 2021, Musk held a video meeting with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. During the conference, matters regarding cooperation between the public and private sector institutions in Turkey and the company in various fields, particularly satellite and space technologies, were addressed. The conference also covered autonomous electric vehicles and the digital economy, as well as an assessment of steps to deepen the long-term investments and existing cooperation. Reports later indicated that Russia was not so impressed with Musk discussing delicate issues with Turkey, especially those touching on warfare. Industry experts say Musk's play may not just be about taking a sizable bite out of the terrestrial broadband market, but about Starlink becoming a dominant entrant into what Morgan Stanley predicts will be a $507 billion satellite internet and broadband market by 2040. That's half of the predicted $1 trillion 2040 global space industry. Musk, also the CEO of automaker Tesla, has U.S. Federal Communications Commission permission to operate 12,000 Starlink satellites, but is seeking a license for a whopping 30,000 more. Now, let's break more numbers here. Around 2,000 satellites orbit the Earth, over half operated by NATO countries, checking everything from mobile phones and banking services to weather forecasts. NATO commanders in places like Afghanistan or Kosovo rely on some of them to navigate, communicate, share intelligence, and detect missile launches. In December 2020, NATO leaders declared space to be the alliance's fifth domain of operations, after land, sea, air, and cyberspace. It's part of the alliance's efforts to keep ahead in a fast-moving and high-tech sector, particularly amid concern about what member countries say is increasingly aggressive behavior in space by China and Russia. Around 80 countries have satellites, and private companies are moving in too. In the 1980s, just a fraction of NATO's communication was via satellite. Today, it's at least 40%. During the Cold War, NATO had more than 20 stations, but new technologies mean the world's biggest security organization can double its coverage with a fifth of that number. SpaceX is right in the thick of it, empowering the organization like never before. Musk has enjoyed some excellent working relationship with NATO in the past, an organization that does not see eye to eye with the Kremlin. In 2018, for example, SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket blasted off from Florida, carrying into orbit a Luxembourg-made communication satellite designed in part to expand NATO's surveillance reach and its capability to deter cyber attacks on alliance members. Since Russia began its aggressive actions against Ukraine, its officials have accused NATO of a series of threats and hostile actions. That makes any friend of NATO an enemy of the Putin-led nation. So, where did it all begin? Hear this. NATO is a defensive alliance whose purpose is to protect its members. Its official policy is that the alliance does not seek confrontation and poses no threat to Russia. The organization has reached out to Russia consistently and publicly over the past 30 years. They have worked together on issues ranging from counter-narcotics and counter-terrorism to submarine rescue and civil emergency planning, even during periods of NATO enlargement. However, in 2014, in response to Russia's aggressive actions against Ukraine, NATO suspended practical cooperation with Russia. The organization does not seek confrontation, but can't ignore Russia breaking international rules, undermining stability and security. In response to Russia's use of military force against Ukraine, NATO deployed 4 multinational battle groups to the Baltic states and Poland in 2016. These units are not permanently based in the region, but are in line with allies' international commitments and amount to around 5,000 troops. They do not pose a threat to Russia's 1 million-strong armies. Before Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea, there were no allied troops in the eastern part of the alliance. NATO remains open to meaningful dialogue with Russia. That is why its secretary, General Jens Stoltenberg, invited all members of the NATO-Russia Council to a series of meetings to discuss European security, including the situation in and around Ukraine, NATO-Russia relations, and arms control and non-proliferation. This kind of dicey arrangement makes Elon Musk, through his company SpaceX, a very useful asset to NATO. On his part, the billionaire father of 6 has tried to foster a relationship with Russia, even calling for more communication between Russia and the US. Musk has called for greater dialogue between Washington and Moscow, with ties between the pair currently languishing at post-Cold War lows. There is a lot of talent and energy in Russia, and I think there should be more dialogue and communication between Russia and the United States, the Tesla CEO said via video link at a forum on Russian education in Moscow. He also said his electric vehicle company was close to establishing a presence in Russia and was looking at whether it could open factories there. Russia has also tried to reciprocate the love. The leader of Russia's space program is desperate to have Elon Musk visit him. On multiple occasions, Dmitry Rogozin invited the founder of SpaceX to go to Kazakhstan for the launch of the Soyuz MS-19 spacecraft, carrying 3 Russians to the International Space Station. More recently, during an interview on CNN, Rogozin gained a fair amount of publicity when he invited Musk to visit his home in Russia. "We respect him as an organizer of the space industry and as an inventor who is not afraid to take risks," Rogozin said. "Musk was welcomed to be a guest of my family and discuss exploring the universe, extraterrestrial life, and how we can use space to preserve life on Earth. I already set the tea kettle on heat," he added. In a response on Twitter, Musk was non-committal. It is a fool's errand to try to predict the actions of Elon Musk, but given his understandable security concerns, it's difficult to see the billionaire visiting Rogozin in Russia or attending the launch in Kazakhstan. One might even read an ominous intent in Rogozin's invitation. The tea kettle comment recalls the poisoning of Alexander Litvinenko, a former KGB officer who in 2000 fled to the United Kingdom after becoming critical of Vladimir Putin's rise to power. 6 years after leaving Russia, Litvinenko was poisoned by drinking tea laced with polonium. He died 3 weeks later, and Western intelligence services eventually concluded that the poisoning was conducted by Russian agents, acting under the approval of Putin. So, Musk is probably not going to Russia, and is probably not going to drink tea with Dmitry Rogozin, but it's nonetheless worthwhile to try to understand Rogozin's motivations for reaching out to Musk in this way. Since becoming head of Roscosmos in 2018, Rogozin has had a passive-aggressive relationship with Musk. He has responded to SpaceX's success with bravado and bluster much of the time, saying the company's engineers are too gentle, or their rockets and spacecraft are not safe enough for Russian cosmonauts to ride upon. And now that Musk is working with Nato, your guess is as good as mine. His relationship with Russia may fall flat, and we will follow the developments step by step. In the upcoming videos, we will bring more on SpaceX's partnership with NATO and the progress they've made, the dwindling relationship between Russia and NATO, and most importantly, Musk's stance on all of this. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on any of that.